On this channel, we've made plenty of videos on how the Earth looked when it was Pangea or when it was not Pangea. Just like we said earlier, the changes that happen on Earth never stop, and the continents are always moving. Everybody knows that animals are always evolving, and that's what makes evolution. And the Earth is the same exact thing. The land may feel like it's not moving, but it actually is. But it's so small that you don't feel it. Like for example, if you live on the west coast of the US right now, 500 million years ago, you were on the equator. You might ask, how do you know where the west coast of the United States was 500 million years ago? With the help of geologists, they can study where the tectonic plates were and how they moved throughout the years. But to predict what the future holds, it gets a little complicated, because just like we said plenty of times before, the Earth is a living thing and it's unpredictable where it's gonna go. But you can give a theory. To predict the future of the Earth's land, we have to get to know the land first. What is land? The first person to realize that the Earth's land is moving, it was a German scientist by the name of Alfred Wegner. This scientist figured out for the very first time that the Earth is moving, or should I say the land was moving, in the year 1912. Wegner did not just wake up in the morning and say a crazy theory like this. He had traveled the world at a very young age, and he got familiar with everywhere. And in these different areas, he was always studying different types of fossils. Any continent he visited and saw the fossils in that area, he realized that it's very similar throughout the planet. And slowly he realized, probably back in the day, all these lands were connected to each other. Alfred Wegner said this in the year 1912, and his life changed forever. But how? Other scientists made fun of him and said he was crazy, and any idea he would give out, they would not accept it and not trust his judgment. Alfred Wegner basically messed up his reputation by saying something like this, even though it was true. They would make fun of him, and he was really not a prestigious scientist anymore. 50 years passes, and Alfred Wegner has been dead for many years by now. And this is the time when different scientists are studying the ocean floor in different parts of the world. And they realize in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there is an actual mountain range forming. And they realize that there is a crevice, and the Earth's crust is separating in this area. This separation causes magma to come out of the Earth's crust and create mountains. By studying this, it really changes the idea of geology. And then we get to the 1960s, when scientists realize that the Earth is cut up into pieces via fault lines, and they're called tectonic plates. And they slowly realize that there is 7 main tectonic plates. These plates are always moving and putting a huge effect on each other. I mean, just look at the Indian subcontinent crash into Asia. Look how it smashed into Asia and created the Himalayas. This is the same thing with other mountain ranges. All the mountain ranges you see today is because of these fault lines hitting each other and pulling on and pushing on each other. You guys obviously know Pangea because we made plenty of videos on it. Pangea was the supercontinent that was here about 300 million years ago, and it slowly separated. But this was not the first supercontinent the Earth had ever seen. 2.5 billion years ago, the Earth gets its first supercontinent called Kennerland. Kennerland was much smaller than today, pretty much the size of North America and Africa combined. And of course, it was much smaller than Pangea. And this shows us not only does Earth land move, it gets bigger and smaller. 700 million years after Kennerland, we get another supercontinent, the Nuna supercontinent. As you can see, a change like this took about 700 million years, and that's until we get to about 750 million years ago, and that's about 450 million before Pangea. This is when we have the Pangea supercontinent. The first land animals were created on this supercontinent. At that time, the Earth's land looked like this and they were connected like this. But they slowly started to separate once again. We get to nearly 300 million years ago. The Earth's land is like this. Pangea, the most famous supercontinent. But it's not like Pangea wants to stay like this forever. And just like 3 times before, it's separated once again. You guys probably seen our video about Pangea, and you know that only the coast was habitable, and in the middle it was like a desert. When Pangea begins to separate from one another, it creates more coastlines, and that means the temperature of the earth got better and the weather got better, and of course it made it more habitable. The separation of Pangea continues for 300 million years until we get to today. This separation continues, but what will happen in the future? To predict what happened in Earth's history is much easier because you have a lot of proof. But to predict the future, it gets complicated because there's no evidence to go by. Right now, North America and South America are slowly moving towards west. And that means the Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger while the Pacific is getting a little bit smaller. Africa doesn't want to stay where it is. It wants to move north. That is why it keeps moving north and putting pressure into Europe and slowly closes the Mediterranean Sea. The African plate and the Arabian Peninsula is also putting pressure in the Persian Gulf and closing that one up as well. The insane earthquakes we've seen is caused by these movements. Everybody knows the Alps. It's in a few countries in Europe. Geologists believe when Africa pushes up against Europe, it's going to create a ginormous mountain range that questions the size of the Himalayas because it's going to be much larger. And every mountain range, like the Persian ones and the Anatolia, is going to continue getting bigger. You might say, why aren't we seeing it get bigger? The changes are few centimeters a year. It's not like it goes up a mile each year. Australia has no plan in staying there either. It wants to move up north, so it pushes Indonesia and starts moving north. Just like we said, North and South America are both moving west, and eventually, millions of years into the future, they reach Asia and they connect to Asia, China, and Australia. Africa is also moving towards the north. That is why the predictions suggest about 250 million years into the future, all the lands will be connected to each other, and they have moved up to the North Pole. And it's interesting to know that this time, the South Pole will be stationary down there. If you remember in Pangea, the Antarctic didn't move either, and it was always in the South Pole. And when all this land and this giant continent moves up to the North Pole, Antarctica will be the most isolated land in the world. It's interesting to note that North and South America were separated from the west side of Pangea, but this time they're going to connect to Asia with the east side, and that means they go around the Earth once. The way it seems, every few 100 million years, the Earth has a new supercontinent, and after a few 100 more million years, it gets separated.